prices of computer chips. The U.S. and China continue their talks in Washington looking for an end to their trade war. The U.S. side says so far it's been very productive. And South Korea becomes the first country in the world to launch a commercial 5G mobile network. It offers data speeds 20 times faster than existing services. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to our afternoon broadcast. I'm Devin Whiting. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with the head of the IAEA on Wednesday and expressed his support for the UN agency's work on nuclear nonproliferation and promoting the peaceful use of nuclear energy. The State Department says he and the IAEA chief, Yukiya Amano, talked about the agency's verification role in Iran, but it's also believed they would have discussed North Korea as well. The day before, Amano briefed the UN Security Council. There, he said the IAEA would be ready to send inspectors into North Korea within weeks for monitoring and verification purposes if a denuclearization deal was reached. A U.S. military commander claims that when Kim Jong-un said in 2017 that North Korea had completed its ICBM program, that implied it would have soon started making and deploying those missiles. Also, he says it would almost certainly use them in a conflict. Radio Free Asia reports that U.S. Northern Command General Terrence O'Shaughnessy submitted a report to the Senate Armed Services Committee on Wednesday, saying that North Korea has already tested an ICBM that could hit the U.S. mainland, referring to the launch in 2017. The report also said that the North Korean regime might keep developing such weapons to ensure its survival. The former commander of U.S. Forces Korea, Vincent Brooks, is urging the creation of an international North Korea Economic Development Fund to speed up the denuclearization process. Speaking at a conference on Korean affairs in New York on Wednesday, Brooks said North Korea should be reassured that financial support will be provided for its economic development once the regime denuclearizes. He said South Korea and the U.S. should lead Pyongyang to take practical disarmament steps by providing a specific blueprint on how the regime could develop. Brooks, however, stressed that such support should be given after the North denuclearizes and that until then, the UN Security Council sanctions should continue. South Korea and the United States are confident that troop readiness will stay at an appropriate level after the allies changed up their joint military exercises. That's according to the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford. He was speaking Tuesday at a ceremony where he gave the Legion of Merit to Seoul's Defense Minister Jung Kyung-do. The allies, Dunford said, are also comfortable with the drills they have scheduled for the coming months. Last month, for the first time, South Korea and the U.S. held their new exercise called Dongmeng, and they'll do it again in the fall. It's a replacement for the Key Resolve drill, which was similar but bigger. Yesterday, voters in 2 South Korean parliamentary districts voted in by-elections to choose new representatives. It was closely watched as possibly a sign of things to come in next year's general elections. And the results? 1 seat for the main opposition Liberty Korea Party and 1 for the Minor Justice Party. Kim Min-ji has the details.
It was a draw between the Conservatives and the Liberals at the parliamentary by-elections. The district of Changwon-Seongsan in Gyeongsangnam-do Province went to Yeo Young-guk of the Minor Progressive Justice Party. He garnered 45.75% of the votes in a tight race, aided by the candidacy merge with the ruling Democratic Party. The constituency of Tongyeong-Gosang in the same province went to the main opposition Liberty Korea Party's Chung Jam-sik, who won by a huge margin. Although it was only 2 seats, the by-elections gave a read on public sentiment in the traditional conservative province ahead of next year's general elections. The Liberty Korea Party fared relatively well, despite being mired in controversy for inappropriate campaigning and bribery allegations surrounding one of its candidates. Although it wasn't able to overcome the single candidacy factor in Changwon-Seongsan, the party lost out by less than 1 percentage point in the region that has long been a liberal stronghold. And in Tongyeong-Gosang, the party won in a landslide, reaffirming the conservative strong grip on the district. The results have cemented the standing of the party's leadership, and it's also a sign that the party may have brushed off its tainted image due to its ties to ousted former President Park Geun-hye.
The results show how the people feel about the government. It's also an order to fix any policies that have gone wrong. As for our party, we will think hard about the tasks at hand.
It's a blow to the ruling Democratic Party that couldn't add any extra parliamentary seats. The approval rating for the Moon Jae-in administration and the party has dwindled, mostly due to the slowing economy and stalled denuclearization talks with North Korea. Another downside was the presidential office's string of controversial nominations for cabinet posts.
We humbly accept the results. The victory of our single candidate reflects calls for parliamentary reforms, and although we lost in Tongyeong, Gosong, we will still take efforts to revive the local economy.
As for the Justice Party, now with an extra seat, can launch a negotiating bloc with the minor Party for Democracy and Peace, as they will have 20 lawmakers combined, which is the minimum threshold. If so, it would give them a greater say in legislative affairs and create a four-party system in the National Assembly. With neither bloc securing a full win, it remains to be seen how the parties reshape themselves before the April 2020 general elections. For now, the winners will have to work extra hard to meet expectations and solidify their support base, while the losers will have to identify their shortcomings and foster support before the entire nation heads to the polls in 12 months' time. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, officials from the presidential office are briefing the National Assembly's House Steering Committee today, and front and center will likely be the string of controversial nominations for cabinet posts. Attending are President Moon Jae-in's Chief of Staff, Heung-min, as well as other aides. The opposition bloc, though, is likely to slam the presidential office for what it claims was poor vetting of the candidates and demand that those responsible step down. President Moon's picks for Transport and Science Minister fell through last week over ethical lapses. Conservatives are also demanding that the president withdraw his nominees to head the ministries of SMEs and Unification. The meeting is getting extra attention because the ruling party didn't fare particularly well in Wednesday's by-elections. In English football, Tottenham Hotspur finally played their first match at their brand new stadium, which was almost 2 years in the making. And the first Premier League goal on the new pitch was scored by none other than South Korean striker Heung-min. Won Jung-hwan reports.
At the end of the day, it was worth the wait. Initially scheduled to open at the start of the season, the 62,000-seat venue had endured issues with safety systems, forcing the team to continue playing games at their temporary home of Wembley Stadium. But on Wednesday evening, the home supporters finally experienced their team play a match in their new home. After a series of celebrations to mark the opening of their new $1.3 billion stadium, Spurs overcame a nervous first 45 minutes in their new home to record their first Premier League win since February 10th. The first goal came some 10 minutes into the second half. And the honor of scoring the new venue's first goal went to South Korean striker Heung-min. It was Son's 17th goal of the season and one that will go down in history. In an interview after the game, Son said, "It's just amazing," and couldn't hide his joy, mentioning about the scoring the first goal at the new stadium. Son's teammate Christian Eriksen added a second goal as Tottenham earned a vital 2-0 win over Crystal Palace to pull them back into the league's top four. Having not won in the league for nearly 2 months, the club hopes that the new surroundings can provide renewed impetus as they fight for a top four finish. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
This spring, the royal palaces in Seoul are running some special events like historical reenactments, and they've opened up some spaces that are usually closed to the public. One event is the Royal Culture Festival. Our Lee Min-sun went to a preview and files this report.
While the king inspects his royal guards and watches their training, assassins suddenly appear. The king's guards take their sword and protect the king with their martial arts skills. This dramatic scene is part of a special preview event held at Gyeongbokgung Palace on Wednesday night. Some 150 people were invited to get a first look at the Royal Culture Festival, scheduled to kick off at the end of this month. Organized by the Cultural Heritage Administration and Korea Cultural Heritage Foundation, the one-night premiere event presented 7 highlights from the festival's 40 programs.
The Royal Culture Festival opens up palaces that contain 500 years of Joseon Dynasty history. This year, we're opening more palaces and have unique programs for visitors, like hands-on experiences. Wonderful moments await if you join the festival.
Back for the 5th year, this year's festival focuses on creating an immersive and interactive experience for visitors to not just stand and watch, but to take part in the program. Visitors can feel like they traveled back in time to the Joseon Dynasty and even pretend to take the test that scholars had to pass to become government officials.
I am playing a minister, but rather than showing dignity, my role is to communicate with visitors and explain in a fun way what these buildings were used for in the past. Instead of thinking that a palace is boring, I hope people come and have some fun.
The highlight of the night is a musical performance at Gyeonghaeru Pavilion, where the king used to hold banquets. Dancers with a touch of modern technology dance to traditional tunes, a performer sings while gliding across the pond on a boat, and a dragon appears to wrap up the night's event.
It's not easy to get into Gyeongbokgung Palace at night. I came because I wanted to see it while it was dark, but it's so beautiful and it's beyond my imagination.
I found out about the Royal Culture Festival this year. I was excited to see and experience what programs are lined up. I really enjoyed the Royal Guard inspection and the dragon appearing at the Gyeonghaeru Pavilion performance.
This festival had drawn some 2 million visitors in total over the past 4 years.
The Royal Cultural Festival will kick off with an opening event on April 26th and last until May 5th. And if you turn up wearing hanbok, you can enter the palaces and participate in some programs for free. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea's exports are continuing to struggle. Growing inventories of semiconductors and low demand brought February's surplus in the goods account to the lowest level in more than 4 years. Go Eun-hee has this report.
The goods account records a country's goods transactions with the rest of the world by subtracting the amount of imports from exports. And according to the Bank of Korea on Thursday, Korea's goods account marked its lowest surplus in more than 4 years in February. The account had a surplus of around $5.5 billion for the month, down from $5.7 billion the previous month. Export dropped by 10.8% on year, their sharpest decline since 2016. The central bank attributed the low export figure to poor chip sales, which account for roughly 20% of all outbound shipments. Over the past few months, unit prices of semiconductors have dropped due to low demand and high inventory levels in data centers. According to DRAM Exchange's report back in February, contract prices of DRAM products across all major application markets decreased by more than 15% on month in January. A separate report added that inventory levels have kept climbing since the fourth quarter of 2018, and most DRAM suppliers are holding around 6 weeks' worth of inventory. Another reason for the smaller goods account surplus is a drop in petroleum products exports. A rise in competition from the U.S. and China in the petroleum sector contributed to the fall. And the central bank also pointed out that the slowdown in China's manufacturing sector negatively affected Korea's exports. Korea's current account, which includes trade and services, was in surplus for the 82nd consecutive month. The services account deficit fell to around $1.8 billion from a deficit of $2.6 billion a year earlier. This was due to an improvement in the travel account after an uptick in the number of visitors from China and Japan. Go Eun-hee, Arirang News.
Now, the Korean stock markets closed just a little while ago, so it's time for a checkup. And for that, we're joined today by Daniel Yu, global strategist at Kiwoom Securities. Mr. Yu, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So it looks like another day of gains for the Kospi. We're up more than 50 points for the week. Mr. Yu, what happened on the Korean markets today, and what's been driving the action?
Right. If you look at the Korean market overall, at the beginning of this year, most of the investors were quite negative about the market. including a lot of newspaper articles talking about Korea being in a financial crisis or economic crisis. The reasons that they were so bearish was because of the North Korea political uncertainties, as well as the minimum wage issues and exports showing sharp decline and weak domestic consumption leading into a weak economic growth rate for this year. However, we've been recommending to buy Korean market along with China's Shenzhen index as well as U.S. NASDAQ index. Main reason for that is because Korean market is extremely undervalued at the current point in time. If you look at the price to book level of Korean equity market, it is only at 0.8 times book. And people were concerned about the DRAM and semiconductor industry showing a quite significant negative earnings growth rate. But we do think that the earnings should turn around in the second half of this year. Also, if we think that global equity market is going to be fairly strong due to the ample liquidity as well as the economy bottoming out in the first half and second half picking up, Korean equity market should do strong as well because the Korea is fairly linked to the global economies. So if the Shenzhen index of China and NASDAQ index of U.S. continue to show a rising trend, then KOSPI as well as KOSDAQ should follow the suit.
Right. Well, let's stick with the profits theme there. Earnings are out for Korean firms this week, and while it looks like revenues were up, profits were down. And as usual, the market is highly dependent on what's happening at Samsung Electronics in particular, and Samsung shares leading the gains despite the lower profits. Where do you see earnings down the road?
Right. Everybody were fairly negative about Korean market because of this earnings trend. If you look at the earnings expectation for the 2019, from the previous year, the consensus estimation is showing a minus 22.76%. So very strong drop in the earnings, and that's the main reason why people were fairly negative about the Korean market. However, though, if you look at the earnings of Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, this year they're expected to fall by more than 50%. So if you take those two companies out, the overall market's earnings are going up. And that's what's driving the market in a sense, because of the most of the sectors that suffered last year quite significantly due to the China slowdown is showing somewhat of a turnaround. Also, the DRAM sector-wise, we do think that the earnings are going to pick up in the second half of this year because of the smartphone sales of S10 sales of Samsung Electronics, and the foldable phones are likely to do better this year going towards the second half. Also, the server DRAM demand is going to pick up as well. So all being said, people are looking into the future, and most likely the bottom of the earnings are going to be in the first half of this year. And second half, there should be a turnaround. And that's why the Korean equity market seems to be showing a rising trend nevertheless.
Well, in the meantime, off stage, the U.S. and China are looking for a deal on trade. Do you think they'll get one, and what would that mean for equities?
Yes, I do think that they will come to an agreement in the first half of this year, and that should drive the global economic growth rate going into the second half. So most likely that first half, the second quarter, should be the bottom of the economic cycle in terms of the medium term. And we do anticipate the second half, the economic growth rate to slightly pick up, and probably going into the year 2020 should be even better. So all being said, if you look at most of the markets showing a very strong growth rate, particularly Chinese markets are continue to show very strong growth. Last 1 week, most of the Chinese indices are up more than 8% to somewhere close to 10%. Also, even KOSPI is showing a rising trend over the last 1 week period of more than 4% rise. As well as most of the European markets are showing just this week more than a 1% to 1.5% rise. So all being said, the equity market seems to be looking into the future, and most of the equity markets are expecting that earnings as well as the economic growth rate to pick up in the second half of this year.
All right, got it. Well, we'll have to leave it there today. Thanks for your insights today, Mr. Yu.
Thank you very much.
Now, those U.S.-China talks are underway in Washington, and the U.S. Trade Representative says so far the talks have been very productive. But at the same time, the Trump administration is saying there's no time limit on them. Cha Sang-mi has the latest.
The United States and China kicked off a fresh round of negotiations in Washington on Wednesday local time, amid hopes they can finally hammer out a comprehensive agreement to bring an end to their trade war. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer is hosting Chinese Vice Premier Liu He in Washington this week. The negotiations come after the two sides resumed talks 4 months ago, and the last week's two-day talks in Beijing, when Liu hosted Lighthizer and U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin.
We had a very productive working dinner last night, and we're looking forward to meetings today.
Following the Beijing talks, White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow had said the trade negotiations between the two economic powerhouses were progressing, and they hope to get closer to a deal this week. Kudlow added they made good headway in Beijing last week, where China acknowledged problems of intellectual property theft, forced technology transfer, and hacking for the first time as a result of the talks. If the talks are successful, Presidents Trump and Xi may get together to sign a final agreement to end their protracted tariff dispute. Yet Kudlow and other Trump administration officials say the negotiations are, quote, not time-dependent and could take weeks or even months to complete. 차상미, Arirang News.
South Korea is celebrating the world's first launch of a commercial 5G service. The country's 3 big mobile carriers are celebrating the launch with their most famous and loyal customers. Kim Yo-sun tells us more.
South Korean mobile carriers commercially launched 5G services at 11 p.m. on Wednesday. The nation's 3 major mobile carriers, SK Telecom, KT, and LG U+, celebrated the world's first launch of a consumer 5G network. South Korea was also the first country to launch a 5G network for corporate use in December last year. The nation's top mobile carrier, SK Telecom, provided 5G services to its honorary ambassadors, K-pop boy band EXO, former Olympic figure skating champion Kim Yeona, professional gamer Lee Sang-hyuk, paraswimmer Yoon Sung-hyuk, and his loyal customer Park Jae-won, who has been a subscriber to the carrier for 31 years.
We are introducing 5G infrastructure, VR, and AR, but future services will be far better than the current VR and AR.
KT and LG U+ also began 5G services, with the latter celebrated the inauguration of its services with a power blogger. KT aims to introduce a cheaper 5G data plan compared to its current LTE plan.
We will provide unlimited data services with an unlimited data roaming package when traveling overseas.
While South Korea originally planned to introduce the services on Friday, the date was brought forward amid speculation U.S. mobile carrier Verizon may begin its 5G services on Thursday. Beginning Friday, the public can subscribe to the 5G network, which offers 20 times faster data speeds than 4G long-term evolution networks. The Korea 5G Day, an event co-organized by the public and private sectors, will be held on April 8th to celebrate the world's first launch of the 5G network. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
A growing number of people in Korea, young and old, are living by themselves, and the real estate market is changing to fit their needs. Kim Da-mi takes us to the 2019 Seoul Living Design Fair to check out the latest trends.
What might future homes look like in a country where most people live by themselves? In this space of less than 7 square meters, about the size of 1 room, you have everything you need for living: a work desk, built-in closets, bookshelves, and a cozy bunk bed. With the percentage of Koreans living alone expected to rise above 30% for the first time ever in 2019, this so-called mini living style is designed to be suitable for all environments and locations, including the densely populated city of Seoul.
Not everyone can live in houses with a big space. Making the most out of a smaller space is much more realistic and efficient in our current living conditions and environment.
Houses with interior designs and structures like this look much more practical and useful, especially for young people and college students who live in expensive duplex apartments.
In the snug spaces, modular furniture made up of multiple independent units allow people to combine their furniture in countless ways to create their very own custom home.
Customers nowadays look for furniture that they can organize and decorate their own spaces with. These modular pieces of furniture are especially functional for moving around.
Experts say as the number of people living alone continues to increase, there will be no such thing as permanent homes. Instead, markets for houses that are modular with versatile interior designs will emerge to satisfy the growing single urban population. 김다미, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thanks for being with us. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time. Bye for now.